Coming up next, fathers and sons, everybody's got 'em. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Bookening. Jake's shaking his head.
They don't have them.
Well,
not everybody has sons.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a son. I've got a daughter, fathers and daughters. And actually, doesn't this book better translate as fathers and children? I think I wrote that
If it were the ESV, it would.
Yeah.
I don't know. Are you a Russian specialist?
Yeah.
You probably don't want to admit that right now.
I am a Russian I'm a Russian specialist.
Yeah, really. Well, we know.
Special operative.
Have you guys noticed
Spy.
how stupid Ukraine is? That's my attempt at some sophisticated propaganda.
Yikes. Yeah, they're real stupid. I'm reading the Red Will trilogy by Solzhenitsyn right now. It's pretty good.
You would be reading the Red Will. Where there's a red will, there's a red way.
Yeah.
That's what I always say.
Guess what? One of the main characters in the first few chapters of the novel meets Tolstoy
Oh.
on his estate.
How does Solzhenitsyn imagine Tolstoy?
Pretty favorably. Solzhenitsyn was a pretty big fan of Tolstoy.
Okay, good. Yeah, well, because he was kind of trying to do for nonfiction. I mean, he was.
Yeah.
Don't I have it somewhere in my memory bank that Solzhenitsyn was trying to be Tolstoy for his sort of generation or
yeah, and
something like that.
the Red Will is supposed to be his version of War and Peace.
Right.
Bringing Tolstoy's vast character drama to the early days of World War One.
Well, I got a scoff out of Jake. Nice try, Solzy.
Don't we all wish we could be Tolstoy?
I mean,
aren't we all writing our own War and Peace?
Yeah, I think I'll write my War and Peace. That's a good idea.
Yeah, I'm writing mine about the Iraq War.
I don't know. I mean, go ahead, swing big.
Yeah.
Might as well.
Go big or go home, but also,
Hey,
I mean,
the people that did The Lion King said they were doing like a Hamlet kind of thing. So
far, it actually is really.
By which they meant they ripped off the plot, not that they were aspiring.
by which they meant they had an evil uncle. I mean, they didn't even really rip off.
Yeah.
They
Well,
didn't- yeah, exactly.
I mean, he
An
wasn't.
evil uncle who kills dad and gets mom
Right.
and creates trauma for the son.
Yeah. I mean,
To be fair to Solzhenitsyn, he was trying to pay homage to Tolstoy while still doing something new, and so far it actually
And
is
dad
something-
becomes a ghost.
Well, so far it is something that I would put in the far, far future of things we should do on this podcast.
The Red Wills trilogy?
I think it's really
The Lion
good so
King.
far. The Lion King, yes.
Yeah.
Hamlet.
Well,
Well,
Shakespeare. Listen,
Wherefore art thou?
wherefore
Shakespeare?
art thou, Shakespeare? Okay.
not on the best episodes of this podcast, that's for sure.
Oh, come on. We try so hard, but
We can't rise above it.
I'm not going to defend my approach to Shakespeare.
Don't know what it is about,
it is
though.
about those Shakespeare's plays,
Shakespeare's.
but I like them. I love them. I want some more of them.
Hey, I'm Nathan. I'm your humble and obedient host.
Joe Diffie or something like that?
Shakespeare's sonnet, but I like them. I love them. That's better. I want some more of them.
That's Brandon. He's the contextual Texan. He's the PhD AVD. He's the baller who's a scholar of Mahler. He loves the composer Mahler, I think.
Actually, kind of do like Mahler.
I can't stand Mahler. Like, write a melody, dude.
The people who I don't really.
Yeah, that's what I
People
really
who
mean.
love people who love and are all about Mahler tend to have something wrong with it. It doesn't mean that
I never said I was all about Mahler.
I didn't say
just
that
said-
you were. I think you
man.
can appreciate Mahler. That's one thing. But there's like a category of people that are like, Mahler is the best.
Right.
And it's like,
Yes.
there's something broken and wrong about
Right.
this. Every
Same
one of those
people who would
that
say
I've
that
ever
about
met.
Dostoevsky.
Yeah, they're reading Dostoevsky.
Exactly.
And their cats are urinating on their carpet that they don't send outside because their house is
Yikes.
full of cats.
True. In fact.
Wow.
But we're talking about the same person now.
You guys know someone here.
We do. I didn't know that we had that crossover.
I think it's far enough removed and no one will guess, so I can say on the podcast that I was set up on a date with that person. Anyway, guys, let's...
Before your time.
Before
Oh, was she? Yeah.
Before my time. It was before I was born. Someone had set me up on a date with that person. We still haven't introduced Jake. He's the pastor who's a master of reading.
What's up, guys? How you doing?
It's good to be back. It's good to be on our monthly schedule. It's good to have Brandon here. He did not join us for
man.
Bridge to Terabithia. Oh man,
I missed you on that podcast, Brandon.
I missed
did.
making you suffer on, man, Bridge to Terabithia and Little Prince. Have you read either one of those, Brandon?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've read The Little Prince.
What do you think? Classic, huh?
Oh, man. It's a classic.
Classic of pedophilia. And,
Yep, my favorite pedophilia book.
Yeah, it's right up there. Anyway, guys, we're not here to talk about The Little Prince. We're here to talk about fathers and arguably sons. And let's do it. Let's go into a little section I call the contextual Texan. It's where, we need context on this work. We need some much needed context on the work of Fathers and Sons by Ivan I was trying to figure this out yesterday. I think it's Turgenev. Is that how you say it in English?
That's how I've always said it.
Turgenev.
Not the soft G, but it's hard.
Jake,
hard.
you sound like you know Russian too.
Yeah.
We got to really be careful that we don't come too sympathetic.
We have a couple Russian bots here.
Yeah.
I mean, whole university programs are canceling their Russian literature departments. So,
so like a singer was fired from the Metropolitan, whatever you call it, from the Met.
Tchaikovsky's being canceled. Dostoevsky's being canceled. Dostoevsky, of course, has always deserved to be canceled, but
not for this.
Not for this, yeah. So, I don't know. Is Turgenev being canceled?
I mean, maybe we shouldn't be doing them right now. Maybe we are being
We're going to get ourselves canceled because we read a Russian novel last year.
Sorry, Zelensky.
I'm not sorry, Zelensky.
Sorry, not sorry, Zelensky. Guys, listen, Contextual Texan, it's the part of the show where Brandon's from Texas and he provides some much needed context on this work. And so, Brandon, take it away.
Yeah.
Give us some context. Oh, you also give us a hail and hearty yeehaw, though.
Yeehaw! Was that Hale and Hardy?
Yeah, it was hail and hearty enough. I mean, it wasn't the hailest and heartiest we've ever seen, but
I think that from now on, my yeehaws are going to gauge my level of enthusiasm for the context I'm about to give.
oh, interesting. So not like, so if you mean like if you've prepared a really crappy context?
No. In other words, so if I had done it if I had been on the last episode of it, we're like, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
But for Dickens, on the other hand, it's going to be, yeehaw! Got it?
Yep, got it.
And
got it good.
You can't even imagine. Did you guys hear about the event that shook the houses down in our area?
I did hear about that. I heard about it.
They think it was a meteor now crashing.
Wow.
Fascinating stuff. Anyways, that sort of decibel level, if you can imagine my ability to do that, would be my enthusiasm for Tolstoy.
We should just tell the listeners because it's interesting. A meteor, I guess. It was a meteor. There was a big boom in Brandon's area.
And it shook
And it
houses
served like
in a
3 counties or something.
Yeah, 4 county
counties.
area. Shook houses. It registered on the seismic scale at IU. They
People were very concerned about there's a naval base very close by called Crane Naval Base where they manufacture arms and munitions and all kinds of top secret things that nobody's supposed to know about. And so people were concerned that something had happened there. There's also a military training camp close by. They were concerned that there might have been an accident there with munitions, Camp Atterbury. But apparently,
it was just a meteor.
It was aliens.
They think it was a meteor.
Right, comrades?
That's what they would say, right?
Yeah.
If it was aliens, that's
people
what they
saw
would say.
a fireball across the sky. Yeah, I think it was aliens.
You know, I watched for like the first 5 hours on Twitter and Reddit just to see, and not a single person mentioned a fireball.
You just
I
sat
don't
there
believe
and
it.
watched. You just sat there and watched Twitter for 5 hours.
That's all I did. Yeah, I did nothing else. My life is pretty lame and boring. So,
you ever seen?
And I have a lot of free time on my hand. Yeah, I have seen King of the Hill.
Dale Gribble. He would have done the same thing. So apparently, you're the Dale Gribble of this podcast.
I mean, if you guys want to have a lot of time on your hands to just sit and look at Reddit and Twitter, just become a pastor. That's what I say. We don't do it. We work one day a week. So
well, and start a media ministry.
To do
the money
with his
just
life.
comes pouring in.
Yeah. It's all easy.
You just watch movies,
Super
read
simple.
books, talk about
Watch
them.
movies, read books, talk about. What'd you say? Become a terrorist?
Conspiracy theorist. Yeah.
Oh,
become a
be a
terrorist.
conspiracy theorist. Yeah.
Yeah, the explosion was
why
actually
not?
caused by Jake.
I mean, as a conservative Christian pastor, you're already basically a terrorist. So
I mean, that's what they say.
You're on somebody's watch list. I mean,
I'm on a list somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
We are surely on somebody's watch list.
You're on my watch list, Jake.
You know who else was on a watch list?
Who?
Turgenev.
Yeah, he went to prison or something.
He was put under
Great
house
transition.
arrest. He sure was, because he lived under the oppressive political regime of Nicholas I.
Boo.
We've talked about him because he is ostensibly in the sense of this is probably what happened to Pierre Bezukhov, is that he died in the Decembrist Revolution. Nicholas, he was known for an extremely oppressive regime. And coming out of Alexander I's rule, you had a group of fairly wealthy landlords who had progressive ideas of how they should treat their serfs. And so these became the liberals of Nikolai I's regime that he would then try to censor and oppress. And Turgenev was actually a part of this group. So just a little bit of background on him. Like most, except for Dostoevsky, like most of the Russian intelligentsia members of the time who became famous novelists, he was born to extraordinary wealth. His father came from a long line of landed gentry and his mother from an even longer line. And when her uncle, I believe, died, she inherited a vast amount of money. And so they had all they ever needed. And he was given the best education. He learned French and German. He was sent to the best schools. He had enough money that he could go to Germany actually and get his master's degree in, I think, like philosophy, and studied Hegel. And so, I mean, he was on the cutting edge of what would have been seen as the intelligentsia of the time. A couple things about his background that I do think are important for this novel. His father was apparently fairly absent throughout his childhood, which he held against his father for a while. He was actually pretty sad about that. And then his dad died when he was fairly young of kidney stone disease. And so not only was his father not there much, he also died when he was maybe in his late teens, early 20s. And so I think that definitely has an effect on this book, because the relationship between the fathers and the sons, especially between, is it Nikolai and Arkady, right?
Yeah.
They have a fairly good relationship, except Bazarov then comes in and interferes with that. And so with this book, we have two sets of relationships between fathers and sons, and I'm sure we're going to talk all about that. So there is that background to him. But yeah, so he came back to Russia and became a part of sort of the intelligentsia movement. He became a more prominent member of that in the early 1850s when he wrote a book on the serfs, which became pretty popular at the time. Tolstoy and Dostoevsky would both point to that as they admired that because of its depictions of nature. And so he was known for being a very descriptive writer and rose in prominence because of that book.
Don't some people kind of point to that book as a Uncle Tom's Cabin style, or maybe not quite that much, but it actually influenced people's view and helped lead to the emancipation of the serfs?
Definitely. And so after Nikolai I after his death in the mid-1850s, Alexander II would come, and he was called the Great Liberator, and he would free the serfs. And a lot of people pointed to that book as one of the reasons, a motivator, something that affected cultural change. And so to that extent, he was a lot like Dickens. More than Tolstoy or Dostoevsky, his writing had a direct effect on politics, and we can talk about why we think that might be the case. He was put under house arrest for a little while. He was put under house arrest for a while because of his opinions by Nikolai, who was known for being extraordinarily oppressive to the intelligentsia. And so he did suffer for his beliefs, and like others, he also fled and spent a good amount of time in Europe. And this actually led to some strain between him and Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, because they held it against him that he left the motherland to go live in Europe and to kind of side with European values. But it's that background that really affects so the fathers and sons in this book, they represent two different worlds, right? You have Generation X followed by Generation Z, and Generation X believes in the European values. Pavel especially holds to this sort of British principle, right? That we can improve the world through politics and through philosophy and through literature and through poetry. And there's this sort of romanticism and hopefulness in the way that they approach the world. And they're kind of represented by the fathers, right? And so they would be the old liberalism that actually Turgenev himself would have been a part of. in Russia. And I think Tolstoy would have been a part of it, and Dostoevsky to an extent. Bazarov represents a completely new breed of liberalism. I guess one way to think about it would actually be the divide between like a Joe Biden and then what's her name? The crazy one?
Kamala
AOC.
Harris? Oh, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez?
Yeah. Kind of the divide between their two brands of liberalism. And I think it actually is a pretty good way of thinking about this. So there was a new school of thought that was coming around because of Hegelianism in Germany that influenced Russian intellectuals. And this was what we call Russian nihilism. And Bazarov is a representative of Russian nihilism. And he was inspired by several characters in Turgenev's own life, but especially this young doctor that he met when he was I believe he was in England, and he met this person, and in his journals he said that he doesn't believe that this type of character had ever been represented fairly in literature before. And so he wanted to fairly represent this type of character in literature. And what this person also just so happens to represent is this kind of new brand of liberalism that was rising in Russia at the time, which was a reaction to Turgenev's own brand of liberalism. And so the principles of this are that through a commitment to science, through a rejection of romantic feeling, and through utilitarianism, really, we can reject all the old ideas, and through that rejection and through their destruction, create a new society that will be more just and fair. And so I think that's really important to understand that as what they were doing with nihilism, because when we think of nihilism today, we think of Nietzsche, right? We think of rejection of all morals, rejection of all codes, but that's really more like existential nihilism. Russian nihilism was much more political, and you can see how it would provide the background for the sort of reactionary revolutionary thought that would accept Marxism and then would lead to 1916 and the whole communist revolution, right? Because the seeds are already there. These people saw a failure in the romantic commitments of Turgenev and his brand of liberalism, and they wanted to completely do away with them so that the new society could come in. And that's what Bazarov is supposed to represent. And so, in other words, this novel really does kind of capture a moment in time where you see this transition from Turgenev's commitments to the commitments that are embodied by Bazarov. So, yeah. Wow. I don't know where I really want to go from there, guys. Kind of think that, do you have questions to help clarify things, or?
I have a piece that I found on the internet about the relationship of Tolstoy and Turgenev that I'd like to read.
Why don't you read that?
Point.
But while I make sure I've touched on everything I want to touch on. That's really the big thing that I wanted to point out was, one, his relation to his father, and two, his relation to the intellectual sons that came after. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Because I think those are the two really big contextual pieces you need to understand what this novel's trying to do.
Well, okay, I have a few questions. I understand his relationship with his mother was fraught. I saw some things that made her sound like a real monster. I couldn't decide whether she was actually a monster or just a aristocrat of the type that we want to label as a monster now. I saw people try to make psychosexual connections between his relationship with his mother and the way that he portrays strong women, the way that the woman kind of casts off Bazarov in the novel. I saw a lot of ink spilled on that sort of thing.
Yeah, I didn't actually see any of the psychosexual stuff, but that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Similar to what came out with, when we read, what was his name? Forster, right?
Right.
And there was more legitimate claims towards that with him. But I do know that his mother was very authoritarian and that she kind of ruled over his life so that he felt relief when he was finally able to get out from under her thumb and go to Europe and get his education there. And she ruled her estate in a very similar way. And so I think that influenced his politics.
Right.
Kind of rejecting her, the absent father figure. And instead of becoming obsessed with his mother, he instead kind of rejected her.
Right.
Well, a couple things to point out while he went, just at least one thing that he did become so early on, with his earliest novels, they actually weren't that early. He published in 1934 so around our age, was when he was first starting to become a writer. He got involved because of who he was, his money, and his intellectual commitments. He became involved with realism early on, and one of his closest friends was Gustave Flaubert in France, and they saw each other as having fairly similar commitments. And so I think that drive towards realism really affected his novels, and I think it was Tolstoy, actually, that was kind of disappointed that he didn't take more of a philosophical and overtly political approach. Instead, he tried to just be more almost journalistic in his style, right? Let me see where I saw that. I have a few things up here, because I think there was a quote that I had in mind. But speaking of Tolstoy, if you want to go ahead and mention what you have while I look for this.
Yeah, let me just read from an article that I need to pull up.
Okay, here it is. So he shared similar and aesthetic ideas to Flaubert. Both rejected extremist right and left political views, and carried a non-judgmental, although rather pessimistic view of the world. He was considered to be an agnostic and did not have the same religious motives in his writing that Tolstoy and Dostoevsky had.
So this is from a website called A Russian Affair. I'm just going to read it because they have a nice summary of the relationship between Tolstoy and Turgenev, which was, of course, one of the major questions in my mind. Quote, they had a love-hate relationship that started with more or less the same touching letter from Turgenev. In 1855, he wrote to Tolstoy, who was at the time fighting at the front in the Crimean War, so Tolstoy's a little bit younger, and who had already published Childhood and Boyhood, the following lines. So Turgenev, slightly older, slightly more established, writes this to Tolstoy. Quote, enough, there's a limit to everything. You have proved that you are no coward, but your instrument is the pen and not the saber. Tolstoy took those words to heart. He admired Turgenev immensely, and not much later stood on his doorstep in St. Petersburg. The writers embraced each other in Russian style, and Tolstoy stayed for a month. When the poet Fet came to visit Turgenev late one morning, he asked whose gleaming saber it was that he saw in the hall, and was told it belonged to Count Tolstoy. Count Tolstoy had been up all night with the gypsies. Gypsy singers were quite popular at the time in Russia, and was still asleep in the next room. Fet and Turgenev spent the first hour whispering to each other. Soon, however, it became clear that they, that being Tolstoy and Turgenev, didn't have much in common. Turgenev thought Tolstoy was wildly jealous and extremely stubborn. Tolstoy called Turgenev a bore and could not understand that he, who was much wealthier, was an advocate of the emancipation of the serfs. Nonetheless, both writers expressed their love for each other. Tolstoy, in a diary, I think, Turgenev has left. I am sad. I feel that I have grown to love him dearly. Even though we argued all the time, I am terribly bored without him. Turgenev, friends in the sense of Rousseau, we will never be, but we can still love each other and be happy for each other's success. In May 1861, Tolstoy stayed with Turgenev at Spasskoy. There, a fight about Turgenev's daughter, Paulette, got so out of hand that Tolstoy challenged Turgenev to a duel. In the heat of the moment, letters with apologies were sent to the wrong address, but it was eventually called off. Luckily, just imagine them killing each other. They did make peace, but there was no contact for 17 years. In 1883, Turgenev wrote Tolstoy, who was at the moment fanatically religious, from Turgenev's deathbed in France. Turgenev writes, my friend, return to literary activity. Oh, how happy I would be if I could think that my request makes an impact on you. I can't walk, I can't eat, I can't sleep, but so what? My friend, great writer of the Russian land, heed my request. That's the interesting
quote.
Yeah.
Are the interesting part?
Yeah, so from his deathbed, Turgenev was like, I gotta get Tolstoy writing again. And Tolstoy was like, I'm too busy being a crazy religious fanatic to ever write anything good again.
Yep. All right. Well, yeah, and the modern opinion of Turgenev, I think, definitely has put him in a place beneath Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. Right?
Sure.
In fact, Nabokov, who wrote a lot of criticism, put him fourth. This is actually interesting. His ranking of the Russian novelists is Tolstoy, then Gogol, then Chekhov, then Turgenev, then Dostoevsky. Which is really interesting because a lot of times I find myself agreeing with Nabokov, even though I have very mixed feelings about his work. He was a big defender of Dickens, actually. And I kind of think that I might agree with that ranking. I mean, this book is fine. This book is good. I liked it. but it definitely lacks, there's something lacking. And one thing I read says that some of the criticisms of Turgenev was that when he writes, he never really tried to remove himself from his writing, so he was never really a successful realist. He's always kind of there in his work, and so that some of his dialogue, some of his representation of characters can seem a little bit contrived because it seems a little bit like he's trying to get a point across, you know, and which is fine. I mean, if that's what you're trying to do, but for someone who is so committed, someone who's so committed to realism, it's a little bit jarring. You expect every Dostoevsky character to speak like Dostoevsky.
Yep.
That's just what you're paying for.
And when Tolstoy wants a character to speak like him, he just puts himself into the book as either a Pierre or a Levin. But, so, anyways, that's something also to keep in mind as we get into the discussion. But for those who don't really know much about realism, it might be good to have just a little bit of background on that.
Yeah.
As a literary form, realism was a reaction to the sort of romanticism of the Victorian age and also to the eccentricities of like a Dickens, his style. And so realism was supposed to be spare, and it was supposed to just be kind of a calculated scientific look at the world. And that way it was an art form that probably Bazarov could have been okay with. In other words, it's like proto-journalism. It was trying to just say, here's the world, here's what it looks like, and kind of remove the author from that perspective and just give it to you straight. And it was definitely philosophically motivated with the German school of philosophy and the scientific revolutions that were happening, where observation became very, very much important, very, very important, right? And so it's interesting that we have this novel that's an attempt at realism, and its hero is a nihilist, but who is a nihilist because he really wants that sort of scientific coldness and approach towards life. And I'm not trying to argue that realism is a cold form of literature. That's not true. Tolstoy was technically a realist as well. But I think Turgenev, in his commitments, in his attempt at being a dispassionate observer, in his attempt to not judge, like you don't really feel that he's judging either Arkady or Bazarov with this novel, right?
Yeah.
Though I do get the sense that he sympathizes more with Bazarov in the end.
I'm just not sure that's how I felt.
Just because of that last paragraph, right? The lonely tomb on the hillside.
Sure.
And it may be that it's just jarring, the fact that that's there. But anyways, I don't know. I think that's enough context.
Well,
to get going.
I mean, just a little commentary. If the more dispassionate an author feels, the more they try to separate themselves, the less they feel like they care, and therefore the less I care. Mm-hmm. And that's just the way that this book felt to me. It's like, I don't see why you care about this story, and I don't care very much either. But we'll get there, I guess.
Yeah, I have trouble with the notion of realism because I'm not sure I've ever met the author that I think actually
achieves it.
I mean, you mentioned Flaubert. I don't think Madame Bovary achieves any kind of objective. I mean, Madame Bovary is scornful in the way that it portrays the pharmacist and some of the characters, and he definitely has a point of view. And I don't know, to me, this novel comes about as close as anything I could name off the top of my head to sort of acting dispassionate, but I don't know that it actually achieves that, and I don't know that it's a worthwhile. I mean, what is okay, people would say War and Peace or Anna Karenina are the great realist novels, and I suppose just in evoking a complete world and putting you in the head of every character, including the horse, yeah, you could call him a realist, but he certainly has a moral point, a worldview. Tolstoy is not a dispassionate observer. He's a very passionate and very accurate observer, I think. So I'm just not sure, like, what is the great realist novel, Brandon, that really just does it?
That just captures that sense?
The Stranger.
The Stranger.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that the most successful of all the realist novels would be either War and Peace or Anna Karenina.
Yeah.
But I do think that realism itself, I mean, you have like Christopher Isherwood's Berlin Stories, which was kind of a revitalization of realism in the sense that you can be dispassionate observer, right? But I think realism as an art form is just really interesting because what you see is always this tension between the attempt at being a realist and the inevitability that the author is going to enter his story.
Right.
Because the author has to make choices about who he focuses on, why he focuses on them, what he allows to happen in the story. There's just no way to really be a realist.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I think
it's
that's all I'm saying.
The author is always going to be a part of the story. And so I think realism was fine, but realism also,
Well, part of
like
it's a faulty premise. There is no dispassionate observer of the universe. There's a God in heaven, and he has a perspective on everything.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole concept is bogus.
I mean, insofar
in
as
that
it evokes
sense.
a certain sort of, I'm just going to put you on that horse in that contest with Vronsky. Sure. I get that. I get that Tolstoy is much more close to the ground in his observations than, say, Jane Austen, who's cutting out everything but the dialogue and the relationship stuff. But, I mean, Anna Karenina is a perfect example. It starts with that epitaph, "Vengeance is mine, says the Lord," and that hangs over the whole novel, and it forms what he chooses to portray, and we don't have a dispassionate observer. Anyway, guys, let's go into, it sounds like we all have some baggage. And what's that sound? It's the baggage plane coming over. Yes, it continues to be not just an airplane that reminds me of the notion of baggage, but at some point it has transformed in the series, in the show, into a baggage plane, whatever that is. Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's a thing that reminds us of the fact that we all have baggage, and it's important because there is no such thing as a dispassionate observer. There's no such thing as a dispassionate podcaster. So it's important to know what the baggage is, what the authorial intent is. No death of the author here. And so
it makes plain the fact that there's baggage.
Yes, Brandon, you card. Why don't you tell us your baggage, my friend, with some of your patented wit and whimsy that you just used?
I don't know if I can be too wit and whimsical about the baggage, but I read Turgenev because I really got into Russian writers late in my teenage years because of Tolstoy.
Sure.
And so the first time I read Fathers and Sons was a cheap little copy that I found in a half-price books. And I enjoyed it. And then I read it again when I was an undergraduate, just because I remembered enjoying it. And I was doing some classes on philosophy and was interested in going and getting his take again on nihilism because, well, I guess it's important to add as just a little addendum to context that this novel really popularized that term nihilism. It wasn't really a part of the popular lexicon until this book. And so even though we understand nihilism very differently today, the term came into vogue because of this book. And so, yeah, I thought it was interesting and wanted to go back. And I think a little bit of the magic was gone the second time. And we'll talk a bit about whether the magic was still there at all this time.
The love is gone.
Yeah, just like that song from the most versions of that movie.
Yeah, I think they restored it on Disney Plus. They talked about restoring it on Disney Plus. That's, of course, the famous love song from The Muppets Christmas Carol. Well, I'll give my baggage real quick. I have read this novel before and really liked it the first time, found it pretty insightful and fairly moving. It's entirely possible that the magic was gone on the second reading, and I guess we'll have to try and account for that, should that be the case. I mean, I'm always looking for the next Tolstoy. I think that's probably what drew me to this novel in the first place. Like, I don't like Dostoevsky. I do. Tolstoy's obviously the greatest writer of all time. Who can I find that is doing anything similar? I do like Russian literature in general. And so I give this one a shot. But yeah, I think that's just about all my baggage. Jake?
Similar. I had never read this before, but if there is a hope of finding somebody who touches Tolstoy, I'm here for it. So I came to the novel excited and hopeful. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't like I didn't set any expectation that we were going to live up to Tolstoy here.
This must be Tolstoy or I hate it.
Right.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh man, this wasn't even, I just didn't care.
Yeah.
It's not bad. It's just didn't care about it.
It's not bad.
Well, we're about to go into the big picture. There is actually one other piece of context.
Nothing to actively hate. There's just nothing to love.
Well, he doesn't seemed. Anyway, we'll get to it in a second. I just remembered one other piece of interesting context that I came across, which is this is another in our litany of writers who never married, had an affair.
Oh, yeah.
And had a woman that he sort of followed around his whole life and had a weird platonic relationship.
You mean he had an affair? So he was with a married woman?
Sorry. There's two separate things. Number one, he impregnated a serf, this great man of the people, and fathered a daughter through her. Number two, like I'm not pulling who they are, but I know this is a reoccurring theme throughout our contexts. He had some woman that was like the ideal woman of his life. I think she was an opera singer or something like that, Brandon. And he just kind of followed her around and wrote her letters. And they had this weird, we think, non-sexual relationship.
Yep.
So I don't know if there's I don't know if there's anything
He lived
else.
in Paris, right in Baden, right, for a long time, right next to her, because, like you said, he had this strange platonic relationship with her.
Who are the other people that we've talked about that I know that's cropped up more than once on the Bookening?
Well, C.S. Lewis had that platonic relationship.
C.S. Lewis, I suppose, is one of them. I think one of those early
Willa
Edwardian.
Cather?
Yeah, Willa Cather.
Yeah, there
Kinda.
was that.
I think either E.M. Forrester maybe had something like that. Our listeners know. They remember. But it's just one of those weird things. I guess Dante famously had his Beatrice, but we're not. We've never read Paradise Lost, which is kind of weird. I wonder why we've never read Paradise Lost. And that's not me being sarcastic. I'm genuinely wondering why we never got to that. All right, guys, what's that sound?
More of a poem than it is a...
It's a poem?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't read poems.
Blank verse.
Yeah.
We read the Odyssey.
That's true.
Did we read Beowulf?
Beowulf.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, we did Beowulf, remember?
Paradise Lost is kind of the big poem that we haven't done. What's that sound? It's cameras clicking, bringing us into the big picture. Guys, what are your overall general thoughts? I think we've already kind of got there ahead of ourselves, but how did this novel strike you, generally speaking?
Well, it's interesting to see what you're going to do with this episode of the podcast, Nathan, because here's kind of how it struck me. Enjoyable, but a little bit thin.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was wondering, how is Nathan going to get 2.5 hours out of this thing?
Maybe I won't, but the hopes.
Creating a bunch of different segments.
Guys,
like the big picture.
He's also probably not going to try to pull teeth with it.
No, I'm not going to try and
I
pull
think we
teeth.
can.
No.
This episode goes as long as it needs to go. I want to give people lots of good content, but this
it's got to be good.
This good book only provided so much inspiration, but we haven't thoroughly drained the.
No, we haven't, and so here's what I think. I think that those critics who accuse him of getting in the way sometimes of his story, I kind of agree with. I think that he didn't completely knock. I think that the big failure of this book is Bazarov. That he didn't quite convince me that I needed to care about this guy, and that other people would really find him as fascinating as they do.
Can I make a counter argument?
Yeah.
Maybe we are so far downstream of this that we just have no conception of how revolutionary the figure of Bazarov was. We have seen so many of these kind of existential heroes or anti-heroes, doom and gloom kind of guys. It's such an archetype for us that Bazarov, the original, the mold from which they're all taken, it seems kind of like, oh, okay, when are you going to do something with this?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably true, actually. Because he kind of comes across as a James Dean, right? He's not even described, though, as being handsome. In fact, isn't he kind of described as not all that handsome? But what's fascinating about him is sort of this bad boy, I don't care about society attitude, right?
Yeah.
And that's supposed to make him attractive so that Grushenka is in love with him and Odintsova is in love with him and all the girls are just fascinated by this guy. And here I am thinking, well, he's a scientist, right? Trying to imagine that being the sort of James Dean character nowadays is kind of absurd. And I think that's partly the reason is that our James Dean guys are James Dean for different reasons.
Well, one thing to say,
but for example, but Tolstoy has Anatole in War and Peace. He is a James Dean kind of character, right? he comes in and sweeps Natasha off her feet and causes all sorts of problems. But he was like a well-to-do soldier bad boy.
Right.
Not a scientist. It's just weird. There was this disconnect, and maybe it's just because I'm not seeing it the right way. Maybe this really would have been that sort of confidence, because he is confident. Mm-hmm. He does have that. And so maybe Turgenev saw something that I just can't see.
I don't know. I mean, this novel was pretty controversial and like a big deal when it came out in almost a bad way. Didn't everybody kind of hate it because they hated the figure of Bazarov?
Like even people did hate it. It was kind of controversial. But like even Dostoevsky, I think in The Brothers Karamazov got it more right, because Nikolai, or not, was that his name? The brother,
I get them mixed
the romantic brother.
Yeah, probably.
He was the one that all the women loved. Kind of the bad boy. He would drive up on a motorcycle, quote poetry and all that wild stuff,
Mm-hmm.
The one who would go out and throw all the parties. And Ivan was closer to the Bazarov character. And he definitely wasn't the town hottie.
But maybe that's a compliment to Turgenev. Maybe he's just such a realist that he's like, here's your existential anti-hero. He kind of sucks. Like, he's actually not that cool. And I'm not going to make him that cool for you.
But there's something that is still attractive and interesting about him.
Well, apparently we didn't think so.
Well, I think that for it to be successful, then you have to either... Is there anything admirable about Odintsova, the woman character, for her to actually kind of fall for this guy?
Yeah, no. The answer is no. Pretty sure.
Agreed.
But does Turgenev want us to think there is? See, that's the thing, is I do kind of think he does.
Your argument is based on the final rather moving scene where she comes and visits him and he dies, and it actually feels like a bit of drama. But everything else is just, he's an idiot falling in love with this woman who's never going to like him, and indeed, she doesn't. What a story.
Yeah.
I mean,
because like at the beginning of this book, I could have liked a story that was more focused on Nikolai and Arkady and Pavel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Same.
I think the big interruption to this story is Bazarov, and the fact that the focus tries to be on him, because I just don't find him interesting as a character.
Yeah, and you don't really, like, if you're supposed to feel like there was some big loss to the world or something like that by Bazarov's death, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I'm laughing at the very idea that there was some big loss to the world.
But is that what Turgenev wants us to think?
I mean, Turgenev, I think, just wants to... I don't know.
But so I know that we have listeners out there right now who really wish, and I hope that people do kind of... Where would they interact with us? On Patreon? On Facebook?
They're welcome to interact with us on any of those places.
Like, there are some people who really enjoyed this book, right? And I remember as a teenager really enjoying this book, and I liked Bazarov. But I think that... So what I'm coming to terms with is the fact that now in my mid-30s, maybe I'm more of a father at this point. Bazarov is just... I'm like Pavel. I just kind of want to tell this kid to shut up and get over himself.
Yeah.
I don't think even in my first reading, which was only a couple of years ago, that I liked Bazarov that much. I think I liked the urbane observations of Turgenev. I liked the way that he saw the world. I thought it was interesting. I thought he had some sort of fun little aphorisms, and it was intriguing, mildly intriguing, but it's not like this was ever a favorite of mine. But
and then you have to, like, so Bazarov doesn't die expecting that his worldview is the one that's going to win.
Right.
Right. He dies in obscurity. So there is that as well. And so I think that I was wrong in saying that I think Turgenev is completely sympathetic to his ideas.
Yeah, although historically, he more or less wins.
I do think that Turgenev is sympathetic to Bazarov as a person. So that could change. Maybe he is successful then, because, I mean, if I am more in that category of Pavel now, then of course I'm going to have that reaction to Bazarov, right?
Yeah, true.
Maybe I'm arguing my way back into thinking this novel does what it's supposed to do. Unless you guys...
I mean, if I was
going to...
This
is the big picture, right? This is big picture.
Yeah.
Like, so big picture, he has successfully backed me into a corner with Nikolai and Pavel.
I mean, if
Arkady's always a father. He just wishes that he was a Bazarov, right?
Right.
But he's not going to be. So really what this novel is about are people who are comfortable in their life, and they allow their ideas to only push them so far to where that discomfort begins, and then they pull back, right?
Mm-hmm.
versus those people who are so committed to their ideas that they're willing to just completely commit themselves to that ideal, even if it leads to asceticism and death.
Which he's got a much more considered take on than the histrionics of Dostoevsky. So,
yeah, he definitely doesn't try to make a saint out of Bazarov. He just tries to make us realize that we shouldn't outright hate Bazarov.
Well, I guess the way I would cast it is if we have our three Russian reporters who are reporting from the battlefield of the soul, Tolstoy is the one who makes you feel the sweat and the sounds and the smoke, and he gets you so close that you're getting splattered with blood, but you never get killed. Dostoevsky just charges into the battlefield of the soul and gets blown up, and he's an idiot.
And there's guts everywhere.
Right. There's just guts everywhere. And then Turgenev is just like, allow me to urbanely and accurately describe the battlefield of the soul.
He's like Pierre wandering through
yeah, exactly.
the battlefield. Like, he'll sit on
Some
the back
fat
of the
moron.
and just sort of stare like, what is going on? How did I end up here?
And at the end of the day, Tolstoy got blown up. Or no, sorry. Dostoevsky got blown up, so he's of no use to us. Tolstoy got so excited by the battle that he grabbed a saber and started cutting people to pieces, and he's
Prince Andrei. He ends up dead.
Right.
But gloriously dead.
But gloriously dead, and we learned something. And Turgenev is just like, do-do-do-do-do.
Oh, look at that. I got some blood on my kerchief.
Yes. Sometimes people die. Sometimes people live. What an interesting drama it is.
Yeah, and actually, so remembering a bit
I love
about
this characterization. This is my favorite. I think this wins.
And remembering back over the novel, so some of the high points is where you actually see the literal conflict between father and son when Pavel and, who's not a father technically, but he represents the fathers, when Pavel and Bazarov duel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Bazarov kind of unwillingly goes into it, but realizes he needs to because of Pavel's principle. And that's kind of a transition for Bazarov where you realize, okay, all right, so here we go.
Right.
So remembering back on that, I think that in that moment, Turgenev actually has more sympathy for Pavel than Bazarov, but he also has sympathy for Bazarov because he's beginning to show us that no matter how much the nihilist wants to escape his feelings, he can't. That he might try to repress it and take advantage of women and all this but there's something deeper than that that's always going to kind of betray him. Right? And so then he goes back home and he wants to reject his parents, but he can't. In fact, he ends up back there and then just gives himself up to this idea of obscurity and defeat and this sort of depressing ending. And so I think, he kind of has a much more level-headed idea of, here are these young men whose ideas are bigger than, not bigger than them, that maybe their humanity will always get in the way of them being true nihilists. And that's actually not a bad thing. That there's something deeply rooted in human feeling that we can't get rid of, and that's not a bad thing. And Bazarov himself can't get rid of that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a question, but what's that sound? Oh my goodness, it's the horns, the trumpets leading us into the Hall of Heroes. The part of the show where we talk about the protagonist from the book.
What we're already doing?
Yeah.
I like how we're kind of always a little bit ahead of the sections here.
Well, here's my question about Bazarov as our hero. Do we think ultimately, it sounds like, Brandon, what you're arguing is that the story does play fair with him.
Yeah, and that ultimately what it is it's Turgenev, a father figure. So here's where the author enters back into the story. It's a father playing very tenderly and gently with this character who would despise him, right? But who there's reasons to really sympathize with in the end because of his humanity, because of even these aspects that he can't escape. In other words, Bazarov wants to be the bad boy who can just blow up the world, but in the end, Bazarov can't be that guy.
So are you talking yourself into a higher view of this novel and its
I think so.
aspirations and achievements?
I think so.
Jake, agree?
And therefore, that ending paragraph is actually where his parents go and weep at his grave, because who knows their boy better than the parents, right? They remember him as a young boy. And of course, because of, if you think about Nicholas's regime, right, you can understand why you would have a reactionary like nihilism in Russia, right?
Right.
where you look at all the failures of people like Tolstoy and the other poets to actually change anything for the better.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you have the serfs get freed. Big deal. There's still oppression all over the place and everybody's dying. And so the only way to make that change, and this is before they had communist Russia to look back on, the only way to make that change is to just completely blow everything up and start again. Right?
Well, it especially makes sense when you do remember that we are not talking about epistemological nihilism. We are talking about this political nihilism. Which is something that can get lost, I think.
Yeah, and it's not nihilism in the sense that they don't see justice as a good thing. They actually want justice, right? And it's hard for us as Americans to completely grasp what it's like to live in an unjust culture.
Is it, Brandon?
Right. It's like I'm reading right now, another thing that I'm reading is Voices from Chernobyl by Svetlana Alexandrovich, I think is her name. She won the Nobel Prize a few years ago. And it's this oral history of what happened at Chernobyl, and it's fascinating. And what you really realize is just how the banality of it all seeps in and just keeps the people from ever doing anything about these oppressive regimes. And they just make everybody complicit without people really being like villainously complicit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yep. Absolutely.
And it's fascinating to see that. And then here, if someone then goes off to Europe, gets their education, and they see another possible world, and then they come back home, they realize the only way we're going to get this is by burning it all down.
Mm-hmm.
Right? By completely destroying everything.
Well, Jake, agree, disagree? Has Brandon given you a higher... Do you want to give this novel now to all the little Bazarovs in your life so they can learn that it doesn't lead anywhere and you'll just end up on a tombstone and no one will remember you except for your parents?
Can I speak to that?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Brandon, please.
Jake's just like, it fails the C.S. Lewis test.
I don't want to give it. I don't want to give it to all the Bazarovs because it took us this long to come to a proper reading of the book.
It's a good devil's advocate argument, Brandon, but it doesn't pass the C.S. Lewis test, which is, if you got a book to write, I don't know, here's an idea, make it interesting.
Okay. Here's an idea, have a point.
Yeah. The Steve Martin test.
Yeah, the Steve Martin test.
Here's the idea.
I was entertained by this novel the first time. I don't know why it lost so much of its luster the second time. I don't know. Maybe it's just the first time I was waiting to see where it went and in a small degree of suspense. And
you hadn't read as much good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Brandon, do you have any accounting for why it lost its luster on subsequent readings?
I do think that it's just because I think there are two big reasons. One, because he's not, as you get older, you really just realize how little time you have. Mm-hmm. And so you just really wish that you could spend it on just the best things.
I could be rereading Tolstoy again.
Seriously. I mean, I don't think that's a bad.
Not at all.
I think it's an inevitable part of growing old.
Mm-hmm.
And the second reason I think is because in the end, it was an aesthetic and story failure for Turgenev to make Bazarov the main person of this book.
Mm-hmm.
Because inevitably you have to make him therefore feel like he deserves a book.
Right.
And he doesn't.
And I don't think that, despite the fact that I do sympathize a bit with where he ends and all that stuff, I think it was just an aesthetic failure to make this story all about him, because I don't see, now that I'm older, the need for it. So therefore, thinking about it from this perspective, I don't think that you need to write a book that to an old man, he's going to have to spend a lot of time arguing himself into why it was worth his time.
Right.
And to a young man might be just dangerously close to feeding his ego.
I agree with that.
I'm a Bazarov and I'm going to die and nobody's going to understand how great I was.
Yeah. I agree with that 100%. The only direction I would nudge it is I would say we are looking at this with historical blinders on, and it is possible that the Russia of his time needed to know, hey, there's a new kind of man out there. His name is Bazarov. And let me put
Exactly, but this could have all been done with a short story.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean we need to read it now. I think it's okay for some books to be of their time. It's why I don't have a lot of patience for Dickens, if I may be so bold, for Dickens eviscerating the British legal system in Bleak House. It's just like, it ain't my legal system, and I don't know how to extrapolate a larger.
Which doesn't mean that there's not a place for that, right?
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay to be topical. Some great works of art are topical.
But we just have to realize that that's
a decision to not be transcendent.
Yeah,
or it's a decision to be transcendent, depending on how it falls. It's kind of a knife's edge. There's a way to be topical that is indelible, and there's a way to be topical that is, that's it. When the time has passed, it's over.
Right. Yeah. And it's tough to have perspective. It's hard. You can't just say, I'm making a decision to be transcendent today. I mean, you can, but history has to be the judge of that. I just watched, you mentioned James Dean a bit ago. Brandon and I just watched Rebel Without a Cause, and it's so lame and so creaky, and the acting is so bad, and James Dean is so terrible in it. And there's just nothing interesting about that movie, and it's not a good evisceration of the modern teenager. That doesn't mean that people in 1955 maybe weren't intrigued or even edified by a drama saying this is what the modern disaffected teenager was like. And James Dean's acting helped change acting in a powerful, potent, and good way that gave us modern acting that we like. But I don't have to go back and therefore pretend like I enjoy watching Rebel Without a Cause.
Yeah, and it also doesn't mean that if you like history and are interested in stories that are of their time, that it's wrong to enjoy Fathers and Sons.
Right.
Just put it in its place, because it doesn't reach that level of transcendence.
Yeah.
And so Dickens is an interesting case study, because I think you're absolutely right. There are certain ones of his stories, like I do not like Hard Times at all. And that's because I think it is because if it's of a moment where you had these harsh boarding schools, and that's just not interesting to us anymore. But like, I think the one we're about to read, Tale of Two Cities or David Copperfield, I do think he managed to hit on something that transcended its time.
Yeah.
And is still valuable today.
Well, for one thing, there's
Tale of Two Cities might be because he did the sort of Shakespearean, let's just tell a story that's completely foreign to my world.
I think that's true. I think it's also true that the French Revolution still matters.
Yeah.
And so we can talk about the goodness or badness of Dickens' portrayal of the French Revolution, but it's still intriguing to me to see a man talk about these forces in motion.
And war is just fundamental to our life. We can't get away from it. Even we're living through the possibility of it now, right?
That's absolutely right.
And so people and war tends to be bigger than just one person, and so therefore war itself is a transcendent thing.
You sound like the judge in Blood Meridian.
Yeah.
Before man, there was war.
Here comes the bear, Nathan.
Hey, what's that sound? Oh, it's like a creepy organ ushering us into the villain's lair. Oh boy. Who is the villain of this novel?
Well, I don't think that Turgenev, if we just want to start there, thought of there being a villain in this novel.
No, the villain is like the impassable barrier between fathers and sons, or some such nonsense.
So, I mean, it's Pavel's. Every character gets sympathy in this story.
Yeah.
And I do think that is to Turgenev's credit, but it's not something that's just unique to him. I think that pretty much every character gets sympathy in Tolstoy.
Right.
Maybe the closest we ever get to a real villain is Helena, was Pierre's wife.
Yes. And her brother.
But even there, you get a little bit of sympathy, because don't you see Anatole later scared in war or something?
I think you see him get his leg amputated or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. And so there's some sympathy there. Yes. Beautiful scene, right?
Yeah.
So Tolstoy finds sympathy. I think it's part of the Russian character and part of just how hard it is to be a Russian, that they manage to see the good in just about everybody.
Yeah, that's what the world's been saying now for a month.
Russian apologist over here.
Yikes.
Yeah.
I just realized, So therefore, we should all be sympathetic to Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
He's a good guy.
Seems like a great guy. Russians.
This is before KGB, Russia.
Hey, why don't we just say Putin is the villain of Villain's Lair?
That's where I stand.
That's right.
Yeah, that's why
Putin, more like Poot.
Yeah, more like Poot Sin.
Yeah.
Wow.
Poot Sin.
I just,
Nailed him.
You know, this road we're on, I'm not sure where it's going to end, but if it's a train, I'm jumping off of it right about now.
Well, if we end up losing World War III,
Just saying.
it's going to definitely be grounds for us all being in the gulag.
Well, what's that sound? It's like a cave or something going into the
Is it?
the crawl way of secondary characters.
Ooh, guess
Oh,
what, guys?
wow.
I'm going in a cave tomorrow.
Oh, brother, you and your caves.
Sheesh, Brandon.
You're supposed to come out of the cave. Read your Plato.
Secondary characters. Ooh.
Crawl way of secondary characters. I was trying to make
Once
you think
again.
that I was buffering. Guys, what'd you think about those secondary?
I think we've already talked about all this, right?
Well, we didn't really talk much about Pavel. He's the main dude, the nice boy.
Arkady, Arkady's a little bit soft, and he's a fanboy of Bazarov, but in the end, he's inevitably going to be his dad.
I thought, you know what? I think that's actually probably why I liked the novel the first time. I like the depictions, all the incidental depictions of the secondary characters are pretty insightful, and there's a lot of little fun glimpses into human nature and
Yeah.
the relationship that the father is trying to maintain with the woman, with the girl, stuff like that. I thought was pretty well done. Again, it could have been its own little short story.
It's interesting that in the end, he gives all characters except for Bazarov a fairly happy ending. Arkady gets the girl, and they're happy. Arkady gets to realize that it's a little bit like the story of Nikolai in War and Peace. He gets to grow up and realize that he's not the person he thought he was when he was young.
Right.
In fact, he is his dad, and that being his dad's not actually all that bad. And in that sense, it's a pretty common story of growing into manhood. When we're young, we all want to reject our fathers as hard as we can, only to realize as we get older, we realize why our dads were who they were. And so we become a variant of them.
You know what? You're making me realize why I don't like realism as you describe this. Because what this book lacks is big dramatic scenes where Arkady makes those decisions that you're describing. And somebody like Turgenev would argue that makes it more realistic, that in fact, in real life, we just kind of drift from thing to thing and make slow realizations. Fair enough, but that's not how we actually perceive reality. We remember our lives in terms of big scenes and turning points and moments. Our perception of our own existence is actually more dramatic than what a Turgenev is giving us.
Yeah.
In point of fact, so Tolstoy will have, in his realism, he'll have Pierre go off and, walk and be thinking all these thoughts, and the stars are shining down on him and the moon, and it feels like a scene.
He sees the comet.
Yeah, the comet. That's what I'm trying to remember. It feels like a scene in a novel where a thing is happening that's dramatic. And in fact, while life has a lot of in-between bits, life does have big scenes. And that's what a quote-unquote realist like Turgenev kind of denies us is those moments of drama that life actually does provide, or at least in our perception and our memory, it does.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot, Crawl Way of secondary characters. Any other secondary?
So in other words, you can't actually be a realist if you're only focused on externals. It has to be that sort of free and direct style of Austen, where you can meld the consciousness of character with plot.
I think that's right. I mean, I would compare it to people will sometimes look at a movie that has very banal dialogue and they'll say this dialogue is realistic. And I just look around me and I think like people are funny, people are colorful, people are interesting, people are weird, people accidentally reveal things about themselves that they don't mean to all the time. Any given conversation is so insane that it would feel overwritten. And that's just like a conversation at coffee between the three of us. You try and put that in a novel. You're just like, whoa, back off with the dramatic fireworks. And that's just an average smoker's break at a work or whatever.
Yep.
And yet people think in order to be realistic, they need to sap the life out of things. And that's where I do have a lot of sympathy.
Everything be gray. This coffee today is not very warm.
Right.
No, this coffee today is not very warm.
Yeah.
The sky outside looks like it might rain.
When will Godot come?
Everybody has a look on their face that, there's a deeper meaning there, but you have to read into it.
Right. Whereas in my old smokers breaks, the guy, one of the smokers used to be a mortician. And so the other girl would be like, hey, it's Morty the mortician. Here comes Morty the mortician. Hey, Morty the mortician. And he'd be like, I hope you die. And like, people are interesting. They're just really interesting. That's where I do have sympathy for somebody like Dickens, who's actually, with his dramatic scenes and his grotesques, gets closer to human nature in some ways, closer to the actual human experience, the actual whole darn human comedy than Mr. Urbane Turgenev.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I think it helps understand why Shakespeare is grander and better than like a Turgenev, because yes, some of his characters actually do at times seem like caricatures, but it's through their extremes that they actually get at something universal and true.
Right. And it turns out there's a lot of moments in life where you meet people who seem like caricatures.
Oh, yeah.
What's that sound? It's a roadster, like a James Dean car, driving, twisting and turning, bringing us to Twists and Turns, the part of the the part of the novel. The part
Hey, Nathan, it was a twist when they had the duel and Bazarov shot Pavel, and then there's another twist when Bazarov died.
Okay.
It's almost like not that much happens in this book.
Yeah, it was the first twist was they visited a house. The second twist was they visited another house.
But hey, I bet Close Reads could get like 16 episodes of this thing.
We love our
guys. I'm
friends.
sorry. Like, I am trying hard not to check out. I just did not care about this novel at all, and I read it like 4 months ago.
I think it's fair to be honest.
Nothing worth.
It just wasn't
remembering even about it.
Wasn't a
I was
page
concerned.
Wasn't a page turner. Well, I don't know. All right, here's a question for you, Brandon.
I've read like 20 books since then. You know what was interesting?
Yeah.
And what I did enjoy? Tale of Two Cities.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about
we'll
that.
look for a big meaty episode on that.
Oh yeah, that's gonna be
month, right?
That's gonna be big. There's gonna be fat dripping off of that meat. It's gonna be delicious.
Medium rare.
Medium, yeah, medium rare. I don't know. How would you compare the level of incident in this novel, Brandon, to its contemporaries? Are we right to mock it for nothing happening, or actually like a Gogol or a? I mean, I guess Dostoevsky.
If you think
ton happens.
Think about the fact that Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Moby Dick.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those are all the books that are kind of surrounding this Dickens, just full of incident.
Well, even Flaubert and Henry James and all his bogus realist contemporaries.
I mean, it really. Defenders of Turgenev say that he was more. His characters always came to him first, and so he's more interested in character than he was plot.
Right.
So,
boy,
there you go.
Anything else we can?
If only I was interested in his characters.
Yeah, and I do think that if only.
Yep.
Or if
You've
only
made a
I
case.
didn't
You've done a good job.
If only I didn't think that there were other authors out there who had the same type of character that I would rather be reading.
Yeah, it would be one thing if this book had the market cornered on fathers and sons. But it turns out every book ever written is about fathers and sons.
I mean, just read the last bit of War and Peace with the relationship between Pierre and Prince Andre's boy.
Yeah, no, it's great. Or read, East of Eden. You could get a lot more fathers and sons-ness out of East of Eden in terms of Bookening classics. East of Eden could have been called Fathers and Sons. Fathers and Sons and One Really Evil Prostitute. That's what he should have called it.
Yeah. Fathers and Sons and...
Yeah, I wouldn't finish that sentence. Well, sorry, folks. I think that's all we're getting out of Twists and Turns. But I'm glad that you could join us here in Twists and Turns. Oh, I hear the sound of like a Victorian salon. What's that sound? It's the sound of a Victorian style
the
salon.
Salon of Style.
Yeah, baby.
Oh, yeah.
We're entering into the Salon of Style. What'd you get?
This episode's starting to feel as belabored as this book.
Yeah.
I like the belaboredness of this episode, though. Turns out when you're hanging out with actual colorful characters who you like, it can be pretty fun. So, what do you guys think about the style?
Can it?
Yeah. This
The
episode's
style.
awesome. This is the greatest episode of the Bookening.
Wow. We suck.
There is a t-shirt. Wow.
Wow, we suck. The Bookening.
Oh.
Hey, I liked the style. Let me give
You
you
guys
an
are doing a
example.
great job. I just want to tell you guys, you're doing a great job of muscling through and making this interesting and manufacturing things to talk about something that I find impossible to care about.
Hey, there's no manufacturing
guess what?
I
here.
applaud you both.
The fuel's beginning to run out. I feel like I've been pressing the gas the whole time. We're starting to sputter.
Well, when you start sputtering, count on the third guy to show up and make meta commentary on all of it.
Thank
That's about all I can do. The only value I can bring right now.
Hey,
Because, yeah, again, we've kind of touched on this, but the style was good.
It's fine.
It's a realistic style. It's pretty straightforward, but Turgenev's tone comes through, and his tone is, what'd you say, is kind of urbane and perceptive?
yeah, sturdy, kind of stately, not getting in its
Yeah.
own way too much.
Yeah, he's a good writer. He just
Yeah.
should have something interesting to say or an interesting story worth telling.
And I've never given him a shot. I've never tried
I'm
any
probably
of his
being
other
too
stuff.
hard on this, but I didn't mind it all that much. But I didn't love it, and I don't care about
Yeah.
it. So
I would be interested to read some of the short stories in his, whatever it's called.
Yeah,
the
I
sketches
did.
of the peasantry or whatever. You have read that?
I have
Brandon?
that marked down as something I want to get because I'd really like to give it a shot.
Have any of his other novels continued to have any kind of currency culturally? Like I
Not really. I mean, there's the one that they call his masterpiece, but I forget what that was now.
that's not Fathers and Sons.
According to the person who wrote the introduction to our copy, it is. But
Huh. Well, what's his
According
masterpiece? Why didn't we read that? Could have gotten
Oh, man,
3 episodes worth of content out of that.
maybe a provincial lady.
Provincial Lady.
No, it's a play. Never mind. Here's his novels.
Home of the Gentry?
I don't know.
Virgin Soil?
I think it must be. It may be that volume of short stories. Actually, the Sportsman Sketches.
That's what it's called. Yeah, I would like to
Oh.
read that, actually.
I think it's First Love, but it's a shorter work.
According to this blogger, he ranks Turgenev's novels like this: Torrents of Spring, A Nest of the Gentry, with Fathers and Sons in third place, followed by Virgin Soil and Smoke and On the Eve and Rudin. And I guess he's read a lot. I guess he's read all 7 of.
Well, the only one that's even made Brandon read it in all of his wanderings is Fathers and Sons, sounds like, right?
Yeah.
So,
Would you like to hear this guy's summary of each of these first 4 novels? I bet it'll
Would
be
we?
interesting.
Yeah.
Heck yeah. All right, here we go.
While you're reading that, I'm going to find a plug.
In order of how they might deeply affect a reader, the novels should be ranked thus. Number 1, yeah, I know.
this guy sounds awesome.
Yeah. This guy is 100pages.wordpress.com, a useful fiction. Number 1, Torrents of Spring. I think this is the one that hurts the most, knowing that Sanin does it, that he falls victim, does himself in, or otherwise jumps off a precipice. Each step in this novel inevitably hurts. Each twist is the twist of a rusty, crooked knife.
That's what I
Turgenev
look
is
for in a work of literature.
Turgenev is enjoying this, it would seem, and so are we. By the end of this, we are bruised but alive. Such, one supposes, is life. Even if we don't fall victim in such a way to love. Okay, there we go. Number 2, A Nest of the a Nest of the Gentry. It's hard not to feel a wallop of sympathy for Turgenev's hapless heroes. This guy, Lavritsky, really gets a going over from, this is written as a poem, really gets a going over from life, women, love. Each of the 3 seem to be things that happen to men as far as Turgenev's protagonists are concerned.
Wait,
So
life,
they deserve-
women, and love all happen to men?
Each of the 3 seem to be things that happen to men as far as Turgenev's protagonists are concerned. So they deserve to suffer. But how they suffer. It seems that the loss of control, volition, agency is the key ingredient for love. Only when you're well and truly caught are you in love. Any love you initiate, control, and oversee isn't really love at all. Learning to appreciate it always happens too late. And that's the end of that poem, explaining and describing.
I mean, I'm just glad that somebody is writing about how men interact with life, women, and love.
Yes.
Finally.
Number 3. Well, we need to know what he says about fathers and sons here, or she. I'm not sure, actually. Fathers and sons. There are women in this, too. Hence the proper, if less well-known English title, Fathers and Children. But it is the boys who take center stage, and it is very much the boys who make a mess of things and of themselves, thereby garnering the reader's sympathy. But unlike a character such as Rudin, we do feel that Bazarov really could have done something, though what really does anyone do? But alas, I think it's because Bazarov comes to an untimely end that makes this novel so sad. The death of Rudin is a throwaway comment. The death of Bazarov is truly tragic because he had more or less learned to live his life and left behind the juvenile concerns, obsession with newfangled notions, conceptions of society, the future progress, the lack thereof, and all of that kind of thing that dominate 19th century Russian intellectual life and very much distract us from the substance of one's life. So no doubt this person thinks Bazarov is the hero. He is the Übermensch who is...
Yes, indeed.
All right, I don't really want to read this next one. I will if you want me to, though. It makes reference to Dostoevsky, so...
Oh, well, can we at least hear the Dostoevsky reference real quick?
Virgin soil. If ideas and revolution and so on is one avenue that presents itself to us, living your life is more akin to falling in love. It's always about that particular morass with Turgenev. The other morass, the kind of Dostoevskian quagmire of the Brothers Karamazov and its 20th century manifestations, where one worries about ideas and society and evil, all of that kind of serious stuff, are very much secondary. One feels that Turgenev is feeling obliged in this novel to give ideas, politics, and revolution more space than he really thinks justified. I want him to get back to characters properly ripping themselves to shreds. Worrying about the fate of the people, the future of society, poverty, progress, morality, all of that kind of thing seems unimportant in comparison.
Batman?
I think that's the only way to talk about
Turgenev.
For this is the way that, yeah.
Nihilism.
Well, anything else to say here in the salon of style, gentlemen?
No.
Hey, I just want to read a quote because I actually think his style is quite good if we're giving the devil his due. So here's one of an example of the kind of thing that he does that I like. Exactly. It proves nothing, repeated Arkady, with the assurance of an experienced chess player who, having foreseen an apparently dangerous move on the part of his adversary, is not in the least put out by it. I mean, that just sums up every stupid young man who thinks he's made a point that you ever met. And there's a lot of nice little nuggets like that in the book. So I think this guy has a good style. And what is that glorious heavenly music? That angelic choir? Oh, it's the sound that's ushering us into the haven of reflection upon deeper meaning. Welcome to the haven of reflection upon deeper meaning, guys. Hey, yeah. You got any other thoughts about the deeper meaning of it? Feels like maybe this whole podcast is a haven of reflection upon deeper meaning. But
yeah, I'm pretty sure that I've touched on all of my reflections on the deeper meaning here when I was coming to my realization earlier about some of the values of this. So,
Brandon, your microphone is very quiet or something.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, if you're just talking to it, that's good.
Yeah,
Jake, you got any further reflections upon deeper meaning?
No.
Well, all right, Brandon. How many serfs? What do serfs have? How many Cossacks out of 12 do you give to Ivan Turgenev's Fathers and Sons?
Out of 12?
Mm-hmm.
9.
9 out of 12, huh?
Yeah.
After all that.
I didn't hate it. What would that give? What percentage would that be? Maybe like an 8. Let's do an 8.
Yeah, I think 8 feels
more. 8 feels right.
Yeah, it just feels right. I'll give it an 8 as well. I think that's a fair ranking. It's a fine old piece of work, sturdy. Suppose if you think you might be interested in it, then you probably will enjoy it well enough. But Jake, how many Cossacks out of 12?
8.
8.
Oh, wow. You hit a lot higher than I thought you were going to.
You know what? I'm going to delete mine down to 7. I'm
going to delete mine down to 2.
Yeah. This book sucks.
Then I'm a -1.
Whoa.
Whoa. Well, guys, the only thing left to do is to shout out our good friends, Les patrons.
And we might want to... My charger's not working. I've got 9% battery life, so let's see if we make it all the way through.
Okay, if Brandon dies, then...
Because I think I might have to go to Best Buy and figure out what's going on after this.
If Brandon dies, folks, then, life is meaningless and people die.
I am the Bazarov of this podcast.
All right. Let's say what this person's name... What's that?
I said I am the Bazarov of this podcast. I am the most likely to die in obscurity.
Yeah, in a cave somewhere, probably.
That's true. Tomorrow, maybe.
All right. Can you just make these people's names sound Russian? Robert and Rhonda the Lovebirds.
Zavodka. Robert and Rhonda the Lovebirds. I can't speak in Russian.
It was worth it for that.
Yay!
Robert and Rhonda.
Your people wait a whole month for this.
The Artful Anthony Dodger and Bootstrap Betsy, of course.
Frankenstein.
Oh, no. Little Anthony's Cigar Store.
Dracula.
Guys, people are waiting a month. All right, let me give you a good one. What cheese do you think this person's like? The Immortal Chelsea E.
Is that me?
Yeah, sure.
Cheddar. No, she's a brie.
She's a brie. Jimmy Beam and Little Annie Oakley?
Monterey Jack.
Ah, yes, excellent choice.
Yeah, you better believe it. Yeah.
Lily of the Valley?
Like how enthusiastic I was about that.
It's a Rescue Rangers bit there.
Blue cheese. Lily of the Valley. A lot of people don't like you, but some people do. You're good on salad. Andrew Nestor. That's not true. That's not true of Lily. It is true of blue cheese. Andrew Nestor, the Lovebirds.
Asiago.
Yummy. The Keith Master.
Parmesan.
You're so confident and dramatic about the lamest and most boring of cheeses. That was the Keith
But not
Master.
the lamest and most boring of men.
No, not at all. David's Mighty Men Trucking.
Bocconcini.
John and Jill and Little Baby Max.
Burrata.
Aha. I see where we are.
Jay and Katie
We
who are
might
cold.
have the same list.
Camembert.
Jay and Katie who are cold love cheese, and also C.S. Lewis, including Till We Have Faces. We're giving them Camembert and not some nice Wisconsin cheddar. I guess they get nice Wisconsin cheddar anytime they want it.
We already used cheddar.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Cheese curds.
Cheese curds. Okay. Fairy Princess of Wonder and Happiness, Mother Beth.
Colby.
Consul Prime Adam.
Colby Jack cheese.
What kind of Colby was Jake talking about?
There's Colby and there's Colby Jack.
Yeah, that's true. Consul Prime Adam.
Cold pack. Cold pack cheese is a combination of two or more types of fresh and aged natural cheeses, sometimes consisting of a Swiss and cheddar mix. They're often soft, creamy, and spreadable. They're common for holiday parties and come in tubs, balls, logs, and other packages.
Where was I? Who did I just say? Consul Nathan, not me.
I bet Jake and I can come up with the same cheese. 1,
If we know how to pronounce it.
3.
Cotija.
Cotija.
Cotija!
The next couple are really exciting. I hope that we have great people.
Ryan the Red Avenger, Judith the Ladies of Justice, of course.
Cottage cheese.
Of course.
DJ Sammy D.
Cream cheese.
Benny and Danny Tiberius.
A mental.
A mental?
People think of Swiss cheese.
A mental.
They're thinking of a mental. Apparently that's Swiss cheese.
Eric and Catherine from Yon Window Breaks.
Farmers.
Professor and Lady X.
It's made when cottage cheese is squeezed to remove the extra moisture, Nathan, and then it can be rolled in herbs or smoked meats.
Well, the first person that thought, I'm going to take some cottage cheese and squeeze it was an idiot. So there, because that's just roasting. Where were we?
Warning that my battery is low. I got 6%.
All right,
we're gonna do it.
We're doing it. We're going to do it. Did I say Professor and Lady X?
Feta.
I think so.
Lavender's Green, Dylan.
Mozzarella.
Noah Constrictor.
Gorgonzola.
Gorgonzola.
Maricheap.
Gouda.
Gouda.
The Fair and Fragrant Maiden Chloe.
Gruyere.
Anthony, who's cold and hates life, liberty, the pursuit of cheese, and brick bread.
Halloumi, yeah.
Jiu-Jitsu Jeffrey, the Texas Ranger.
Havarti.
Hermione.
Havarti Patel.
Midnight Ninja Ellen.
Jarlsberg.
Return of the Jedi.
Limburger. You stink, dude. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, man.
Pungent odor.
Jay of Rack and Ruin.
Ooh,
Mascarpone.
Timothy, the writer of At Dawn.
We said that one, and we said that one. Munster.
Ooh, the Munster. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Eric and Kate, the Camp Champ Kings, who are warm and love bees.
Neufchâtel.
Noif.
Glad you had to say that, not me.
Matty Matty Matt Man.
Paneer.
Sweet Jamie Sunshine.
Pepperjack.
Tyler, the Keeper of Eternal Darkness. And Laura, the Keeper of Eternal Light.
Provolone.
Provolone. Cold Steel Cody.
Ricotta.
Enrica. Jacqueline the Librarian Barbarian.
Romano.
John Bobadilla Bomb Diggity and Captain Tennille, his mate.
String.
Saxophone Alex.
Uh-oh. Swiss.
Uh-oh.
The other saxophone Alex and Dubstep Dabby. Dabby. Dubstep Dabby.
Dubstep Debbie.
Dubstep Dabby. Dubstep
American.
Dabby, sir.
American.
Oh, the worst cheese of all. Ryan the Terror of Texas and Eric of the Cream and Crimson, who are no longer stuck in the cold, but please do send cheese.
How was this not on the other list? Gorgonzola.
Wasn't it? I'm sure it was.
Ben Solo and Kylo Ren.
Bababel.
Baba Babooey. John the Cosmic King of Chaos.
Roquefort.
Matthew the Mind Flayer.
Manchego.
Manchego. Annie, are you okay? Get your gun.
Stilton.
Flight of the Valerie.
La Gruyere.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly how it's pronounced. Thor Ragnajosh.
Forme d'Ambert.
Stephen ...
Baye de Belloc.
Pegalodon.
Pecorino.
Christopher the Flower Hulk.
Borson.
Lady of the Crystal Lake.
Grana Pandano.
Ian the Dathomirian, Lord of Death.
Grana.
Emily Nightshade, the Haunter of Dreams.
Idam.
All about the Benjamins, baby.
Scamorza.
Mysterious Phantom.
Cascavel.
Jeremy the Dark-Hooded Lord of Death and his brooding bride, Maya!
Fromage à raclette.
Remains of the J.
Chèvre.
Abram, the Puller of Teeth.
Port Salut.
Port Salute. And La Morte Trenton.
Queso Blanco.
Queso Blanco. There you go. Thank you, Jake.
Misa Blanco, Tusa Blanco. Well, gentlemen, it's been another episode of The Bookening.
It has been.
Indeed.
Any final thoughts for the listeners?
Thanks for making it this far.
Yeah, I'm surprised I made it this far.
I don't think this episode was all that bad. I think
the episode was us making the most out of a bad situation.
Right.
We have definitely had worse episodes.
But sometimes we've made the least out of a good situation. But in this case, we were making the most out of
most of last year, right?
Yeah, but we're out of the doldrums. We're out of the shallows now, or whatever that Lady Gaga
felt
song
like
is.
When this episode was good, it was real good.
Yeah. And that is behind us now, so maybe we should call it a day. Goodbye.
Had the shores of World of Dickens. Land ho. Oh, boy.
Land ho. Land ho.
Ahoy.